Spooner. I'm here with Kanban University, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about metrics and sort of this interesting tool around metrics. Again, for those who just joined a second ago, my name is Joey Spooner. I'm here as the VP of Product Management and Community Development for Kanban University. And I'm fortunate enough today to have Sonia Sidorova, hopefully I said the last name right, I'm a little tongue-tied today, who is the owner of Nave. And so, Sonia, I think you would like to introduce yourself, and I'd love to know a little bit more about this topic of daily meetings and outcome-driven events. It sounds really interesting.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. So, hi everyone. I hope that you're having a wonderful day. My name is Sonia Sidorova, and I'm the founder and CEO of Nave. We help managers make reliable, data-driven decisions and deliver on their commitments, all while managing happy, motivated, and engaged teams. And today's presentation will be all about one of my most favorite topics: how to turn your daily meetings into outcome-driven events, which will ultimately help you head your improvement efforts in the right direction. So here is what I want to start with. For some people, the daily call is a tool for collaborative productivity. For others, it's yet another meeting that takes time away from what they really should be working on. So, what makes the difference between an effective daily meeting and one that just wastes your time? This presentation will focus on the most strategic approach to getting the most out of your daily calls. I'll show you what tools to use and how to use them to keep your meetings streamlined, effective, and focused on delivering results. So grab a notebook, a pen and paper if you don't already have something to take notes with, and I promise you, by the end of our session, you'll have so many new ideas. You will be ready to take action, and you will understand why adopting this approach is so integral in your business agility journey. All right, let's get to it. So back in the day, it was almost traditional to spend our daily calls asking all the people in the team what they did yesterday and what they're doing today. And here is the paradox. Managing people does not lead to improvements in your delivery performance. And this is due to one simple reason. Time spent at desk doesn't necessarily translate into productive time. Productivity should first and foremost be assessed in terms of achievements and outcomes, rather than the number of work hours logged on your time tracking system. Let me tell you a story. Tony was one of the backend developers in the integration department of a company that I was working for back in the day. And he was a very experienced programmer. He was also a great team player who was really passionate about coming up with the most feasible options. However, he could never completely cooperate with the rules of the traditional workplace. The Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 grind just wasn't for him. And I will never forget the last time that he was called out for being late at work. He showed up one morning at 9:15, casually strolling in with his favorite hot cappuccino and chocolate croissant. And it was a tradition of his to fully enjoy his breakfast before diving into the lines of source code. However, this morning was different. His boss was standing beside his desk, tapping his watch in disapproval. He said something like, "Tony, this is absolutely unacceptable. I can't remember the last time you were here before 9. And Tony wasn't really the kind of guy who would allow himself to be sacrificed at the altar of office discipline, especially if the rule didn't make any sense to him. So what he said was, "Well, good morning to you too, sir. Did I miss anything?" And of course, he knew that he hadn't. He was still connected to his work in a dozen different ways. He had checked his calendar the night before, he had been in his emails all morning, and all internal messaging notifications were turned on. If anyone wanted to get in touch, they would have already done so. At this moment, his boss called him out in front of the entire department. What he said was, Tony, the working day started 15 minutes ago. You being late is bad for morale. It looks like you aren't pulling your weight around here. That one hurt. The assumption that he wasn't producing just because he wasn't physically stuck to his desk was too much for his pride. And the next day, he filed his resignation. Tony's boss mistakenly assumed that keeping everyone in their working places would ultimately bring success to his team. What he didn't realize was that managing people leads to a dead end. Nowadays, how we work and why we work is fundamentally out of sync with the expectations of the traditional workplace. The old command and control mindset simply does not work anymore. Instead, there is a need to modify the traditional management strategies and approaches in order to deliver in a consistent, predictable manner. So why do we keep managing people? Do we believe that monitoring and diligently filing every second in our workers' time is the best way to make the most of our investment? Even though managers are often obsessed with optimizing the individual's time, this practice actually inhibits the end goal of optimizing our overall delivery speed. And even though the famous 3 questions don't take place in our daily calls that often, recently we've seen a new trend start evolving, which pretty much reverts us right back to our old bad behavior. What I'm observing over and over again is that during their daily calls, teams go through all the work items on the board and report their status. So what's the problem with this approach? Let's dig deeper here. Assuming everyone on the team is working on something, which is usually the case, what is essentially happening here is that you are asking each and every person in the team what they are currently doing. Now the focus has moved back to managing people, and it's being taken away from understanding the problems that are hindering your performance. When we perceive our daily call as a status update meeting and ask people what's the status of their work every day, the interfering spark of micromanagement starts to build, slowly but surely. The team's engagement and motivation levels go down, and with it, the daily call starts to feel like another thing that's distracting people from doing their work. And that's not all. Your meetings are probably one of the most expensive overhead costs within your organization. Imagine you manage a team of 10 people and they have about 15 work items in progress. With this setup, the call would easily take about 30 minutes to go through each of them and have everyone give their update. This is a total of 5 man-hours, which could otherwise be spent delivering results. And that's only if you moderate the meeting well. Usually, it takes even longer. So, does it really make sense to spend everyone's time reporting their status? Now, you might be wondering, okay, Sonia, but if the team doesn't give an update in our daily calls, how do we know the status of the work? This is exactly what your Kanban board is about. The sole purpose of your board is to provide an overview of the status of the work at any one time. As such, your Kanban board should be the single source of truth, and it should represent reality. All the work the team is doing should be visualized on the board. Your decisions affect your predictability, so you have to ensure you make informed ones. The work items need to be in their actual states. If you have to suspend the work, the cards should be marked as blocked. The urgent items need to have their own class of service so the team knows how to handle them on their own. And if you observe that your board is not up to date, open up the question to the team, emphasizing the importance of visualizing the work properly. That's how you cut out the time that everyone spends explaining what they're currently doing during your dailies. This is the first step to making your calls streamlined and effective. Now, your daily meeting is not a status update meeting. The goal of your daily meeting is to navigate the flow of work. What does this mean? You have to move your focus from the workers to the work itself. It means that your focus should be on managing any blockers, bottlenecks, or urgent requests that are slowing you down. It also means that you only talk about the items that are prevented from moving further in your workflow. How can you do that? There is a tool at your disposal that will enable you to get there. That tool is called the aging chart. This is what it looks like. The aging chart enables you to track your current tasks in progress. It uses the same visual format as your Kanban board, with each column representing a state in your workflow. The aging chart shows how many days a task has already spent in progress. The colored zones you're seeing here in the chart are called health zones, and they represent a timeline. They visualize the amount of time that your completed work items have spent in progress as the work was moving through each process state. So the dark green zone at the bottom represents the timeline at which 30% of your completed work moved through the workflow. The light green zone visualizes the timeline of 50% of your previous work, then the yellow corresponds to 70%, the orange to 85%, and the light red zone indicates the amount of time that 95% of your completed items took to be delivered. If your dots are positioned above the light red zone, these are your tasks. So each dot corresponds to a task in progress. And if your tasks are positioned above the light red zone, this means that your current tasks are spending more time in the process than 95% of your previously finished tasks spent in that specific state. So in this specific example, in the code review state, the code review state points to 9 days. That's the yellow zone. It points to 9 days here. What this means is that by this point, 70% of our completed items spent up to 9 days in the workflow. We can see that there is an item here in code review that points to 3 days. It is still in the yellow zone. This tells us that this specific item has taken less time so far than 70% of our previous work. So it's moving predictably and within our expectations. Let's look into the other item, the one that's here on the top of the testing state. It is positioned on the border between the green and the yellow zone. This means that it has taken more time than 50% of our work in that process state. So if your dots go into the red zone at any point along the workflow, this means that they're taking significantly longer than your previous work items and you're going off track. And the lines stretching across the chart are called percentile lines. Both the percentiles and the health zones represent the exact same thing. The only difference is that the percentiles show you how much time your previous items spent in the workflow overall, while the health zones show that exact same information split by process state. That's why the percentile lines always line up to where the health zone ends. Now let's look at this specific example. This is the aging chart of a development team of 3 people. Once again, the red zone represents the time 95% of your completed work items needed to move to the next step. So for this team, the only focus of the daily meeting is discussing the 2 items in the red zone, which have taken much longer than 95% of everything else that has been finished so far. And the conversation should not be about what's taking so long? Don't ask what's taking so long. Instead, ask, is there anything I or anyone else in the team can do to make sure we enable the work to move further? Carefully select your language here, as this discussion could either make or break one's motivation. And using this approach, you not only keep a finger on the pulse of the work and make sure you act quickly if any impediments arise along the way, but you also enable a supportive environment in which you can have the right conversation at the right time. Why is that important? There are plenty of reasons causing tasks to get stuck in your workflow. Internal and external blockers, neglected maintenance tasks, unclear requirements, delayed business feedback. These are a handful of causes behind delayed work in progress. Leaving incomplete tasks in the workflow for too long drastically increases your delivery time overall. It carries a risk of reduced forecasting accuracy, and ineffective forecasting will hinder your ability to predict your delivery times for both single work items and entire projects. This concept of flow debt makes your system unstable and unpredictable. Flow debt is when the delivery time of a task in progress is reduced by borrowing time from other tasks in progress. Team members preferentially work on a specific task at the expense of others in the process. Any shift in priorities, deviation in the management focus, or other interruptions in the middle of the process can generate flow debt. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. As with financial debt, the short-term benefits of accumulating flow debt can be worth the long-term costs associated with it. Focusing all team efforts on resolving an emergency may be the best course of action. However, in these cases, it is essential to understand, to be aware of, how buildups of flow debt affect your whole process. The delay of other work items is the less costly effect. What is more crucial is that the flow debt has a negative impact on the predictability of your entire delivery system and makes your forecasts way less accurate and reliable. And these are all deeply adverse effects, and the following question arises: how do we avoid work in progress from being delayed? And a simple yet effective method is to introduce a new policy where a task becomes the highest priority of the team once it crosses the 70th percentile. Essentially, what you're saying is 70% of our tasks have taken less than this one to complete. Let's focus on it in order to avoid delays. Another useful practice is to introduce an explicit process policy of pulling the tasks across the process in the same order they arrived in. In other words, the oldest task should be the first to leave the process. Here at Nave, we managed to reduce our delivery times by 250% adopting this approach. And by implementing these practices, you are effectively preventing your work in progress from aging artificially. During your daily calls, apart from going through all the aging work on the chart, talk about the urgent work you're handling. Are there any expedites in the system? Go through any blocked work that is staying and waiting in your process. Identify what's causing the work to get stuck and take action. The outcome of the meeting must be to come up with a concise action plan. For example, if a work item is blocked, what needs to happen to unblock it and who is accountable for that action? If there is aging work waiting to be handled, who will start working on it? Write down a few bullet points. Keep it to a maximum of 3 so you can keep the entire team focused on the most pressing issues that are slowing you down. The next day, start the meeting by following up with the action plan. Go through the bullet points and see what has been done. Then go back to the aging chart and evaluate your current work in progress. Repeat that process on a daily basis. And if it turns out that there are no expedites in the system, everything is positioned in the green zone or even in the yellow zone, there is no blocked work, there is no aging work, then that's a good time to close the call and let everyone go back to their usual stuff. So make sure that you actually follow up with only the work that's aging, blocked, or urgent. That's it. If the rest of the work is moving through the process as you expect it to move through the process, there is no point to put your focus in there. And this approach will turn your daily meetings into short, outcome-driven, actionable calls that enable you to make progress and see the results of your improvement efforts. We've been doing this, I don't know, since 2018. And I have to tell you, our dailies take anything between 3 and 8 minutes. We are currently managing a team of 10 people. Every single day, our dailies are taking less than 8 minutes to manage the flow of work and to make sure that everything is moving through the workflow as we expect it to move through the workflow. Essentially, this approach turns our calls into a continuous improvement mechanism. And I would like to give you an action item. We've prepared the Kanban cheat sheet for effective daily meetings for you. Download this cheat sheet at getnave.com/KU and keep it handy during your dailies. As long as you follow this guideline and as long as you go through the steps in there during your calls and follow the agenda that's in there, you've made the most of your time and efforts. So go to getnave.com/KU and grab your free cheat sheet there. And I want to end this presentation with this. Start from a place of 100% trust. Stop managing the workers and start managing the flow of work. Your teams have their explicit policies. They have their goals. They have their deadlines, and assume by default that they're here for the right reason. My sole responsibility is to manage the work effectively and build a decision-making framework that suits the needs of my business. The explicit policies that come with the framework enable self-managed teams who have the autonomy to make decisions on their own. I encourage acts of leadership at all levels, which ultimately helps us continuously improve our decision-making processes. Everyone knows what to do in every scenario, especially in emergency situations. This approach helps us deliver results to our customers in a consistent and predictable manner. And it doesn't matter whether my teammates are at their desks from 9 to 5. It doesn't matter whether they work from the office, from home, or in Tenerife in their shorts. All I care about is sustaining the predictability of our delivery system. My focus is on the workflow, resolving bottlenecks, blockers, or dependencies along the way, and enabling my team to do what I've hired them to do. It's not the amount of time we work that makes our customers stay with us. It's the level of predictability we provide to them. As long as the work is getting done on time and to a high degree of quality, my team have achieved their goals. There is no need to track hours or request status reports during our daily meetings. I believe, and I strongly believe, in promoting a supportive organizational culture. I believe that people want to show up to a workplace that feels more like a community, a workplace where they can be among friends, where they can bring their whole selves. I don't want to manage my people. I want to inspire them. And I believe that you, as a leader, have to champion your team no matter what. They need to know that they're working with someone that has their back. And that's the strongest motivational booster out there. I hope you found this session valuable, and thank you very much for your attention.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. That was a really good kind of little snippet of what you've got going on behind the scenes inside your company, but also with Nave as well, and sort of how you use it. We had one question that came through, and I wanted to welcome anyone who's here in the panel, I mean the attendees here, to go ahead and ask any questions they'd like through the chat screen here. We'd be happy to answer them for you. I've got a couple that came to mind, but one that came up while you were showing your chart earlier was from a guy named Moro. And I believe I said it right, Moro. He asked a simple question: does the chart assume that all work is of the same size? How would you answer that one?
My favorite question. So having items of the same size to make forecasting work, or to manage your work effectively, or to make Kanban work overall is one of the biggest misconceptions out there. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's the size of your work item. The nature and the complexity of the work doesn't matter, and it doesn't affect the reliability of your forecasts and the reliability of the decisions that you're making. The only thing that matters is whether your system is optimized for predictability. Let me give you an example. Let's assume that you have a very big, very complex task and you have to handle that work item. And let's assume that using your flow metrics and your analytics, you know that you can handle any type of work within 10 days. That's what happened in the past. There is an 85% probability or even 95% probability that you can handle any type of work within 10 days. Out of the sudden, this huge big thing comes in and your gut is saying that even the effort time is going to take more than 10 days. So how do we handle a situation like this one? The first thing that we are doing is, as I mentioned, we talk to the team. Do you guys feel like the effort time on its own is going to take more than 10 days? It's obvious that it will be the case. So we move on to the next question. Is this value, is this item, does this item actually bring customer value right now? Do we really have to start working on it right now? What would happen if we don't start working on it right now? So answer that question. If something is not important, and that's in general, it doesn't really matter what's the size of the work. If something doesn't bring value to your customers and your business right now, don't start it. You can't imagine how many items stay and age in the workflow artificially just because they are not a priority at the moment. So you reevaluate the business opportunity. Do you have to start it now? If the answer is yes, you move on to the third step. Can we actually do something different to solve our customer's problem? Can we come up with something easier, to something quicker, something faster that will still solve that issue? If the answer is yes, then you go with that new idea. If the answer is no, and you still have to stick to your original scope, the next thing will be, can we actually slice it as we preserve the concept of customer value with each sliced item, and then take just one of the pieces and move on with it, and then leave the rest of the pieces for later? Can we do that? And if the answer is still no, then what you do, that's the last step. So, sorry, that's not the last step, that's the fourth step. What you do then is organizing the team and saying, let's see whether there are 2 people or 3 people that can jump in and work on that item, so we make sure that we still deliver it within the threshold that we have. Can we increase the capacity that we put into that specific work to make sure we still deliver within that 10 days threshold? And from then on, your main responsibility and the responsibility of the team becomes to manage the work effectively. Go back to the aging chart. Make sure this item is the highest priority. Eliminate any opportunities for other work items to borrow time from it. Like eliminate every chance of generating flow debt. If there are any bottlenecks, blockers, dependencies, obstacles that are popping up along the way, resolve them immediately. Reduce the waiting time in the system as much as you can. So this is a very simple example of why the size of the work doesn't matter. And it's really the process policies that you've adopted to optimize your system for predictability is what matters. We're always going to find a way to deliver within that threshold. And if you've gone through all of these steps and you actually do your best to deliver the work as soon as possible, and it still takes more than 10 days, that's perfectly fine. It's just the nature of your work. Remember, you're committing with 85% certainty. You can never commit with 100% certainty. Alas, no one has invented the crystal ball just yet. You cannot predict the future with 100% certainty. Never. So if you've gone through this process and it turned out that the work is delivered in, let's say, 15 days or 20 days, that's fine. As long as you communicate this early to your stakeholders and your customers, you've done the right thing. You communicated the risk that they should manage as well. And furthermore, these 20 days now will build up on your past performance data. And the threshold now won't be 10 days. The next time it would be 20 days. And the next time when you handle work item that will be with a similar nature, or there are plenty of unknowns and uncertainties, you already have that built in your forecast. So yes, long story short, my answer is this approach works with items of different sizes, and the size of the work is not a component that plays role on the reliability of your decision making.
Got it. Thanks so much. And sort of a follow-on question for that, would the chart assume that it's the same type of work, perhaps, that's being looked at on the, okay, great. So you
Absolutely
can mix,
not.
okay, okay, okay. Well, that was kind of my big question there for a second there. Secondly, you know, day-to-day meetings, I used to do these a lot with a team inside an agency, inside the federal space, and we always had that kind of format that you're talking about, with sort of having the focus on the work, not the worker, and a lot of focus on the idea of saying, let's pay attention to anything that looks like it might be at risk, you know, of delay or at risk for impact of like not having a problem solved. So who's going to escalate the issue and deal with the issues associated with the work was a common piece of a conversation from there. But something I was wondering about, because you have a team of 10 people, that's kind of common for a lot of people to run into these days. Do you rotate who does sort of the review of the work, or is it always kind of you leading that conversation?
No, it's never me. We always rotate the people. Every day it's a different person who is actually leading the meeting. And the reason behind this decision is that I really want to encourage acts of leadership in everyone. I want everyone to understand that they can speak up, they can lead if they need to. And also I need everyone to understand what it takes to make the work moving forward. What if tomorrow I take a leave or I go on a vacation for 2 weeks, 3 weeks? I'm planning to have a sabbatical next year and I plan to be away for a month, probably 2 months. I do want my business and my team to manage the work effectively, even if I'm not there to guide them. That's super important for all of you to understand. The process policies and the systems are there to guide your decisions. And it doesn't matter whether you as a manager or a leader is there to actually produce effective results and produce results in a consistent manner. So if you have that chance, always give that responsibility to different people so they can feel encouraged, that they can also take the lead, and they know that when there is a decision that needs to be made, they can make that decision without someone else waiting for someone else to give the approval. That's why we have the policies in place. That's why we've built all of these systems to optimize our workflow so that everyone knows what to do at any one time. Everyone understands what needs to happen at any one time, and they self-manage themselves.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I've been hearing about this lately with a lot of more companies that are just kind of getting into like the Kanban stuff. They're really allowing the teams to just carry on and do their own work themselves, not have the sort of top-down kind of approach that you just described, which could be problematic. For example, if you leave or something else happens, they really guide on their own, lead on their own in the Kanban environment. So there were two other questions that popped up here. So in this case, the question was from a really interesting question, honestly. How can we apply this dynamic when the team works in silos? In other words, we do not have a multidisciplinary team. So they asked this because there is no way to deliver collaboratively. Each one works in their own specific module. So kind of that matrix approach, perhaps, or something like that.
Okay, so there are so many things that can be done. Essentially, what you're talking about is probably a team that's not used to managing the work itself, and the focus is really on the silos indeed, and everyone is like digging in their rabbit hole. So this is the beginning of a very long journey. And I've seen this a lot when I'm working with our clients, and especially with managers who have traditional management approaches. So when it comes to the team itself, the first thing that needs to happen is that they really need to move the focus on the final result. Individuals' performance doesn't make sense in the agile world. Individual performance is not what you have to be interested in. What you have to be interested in is what's the performance as a team as a whole in the lowest level. So how your team as one whole is delivering results. If you put that focus, if you move that focus on let's measure our delivery times, let's measure our total work in progress, let's measure how many items we actually have in progress overall, if you start communicating that concept, your team will consciously and subconsciously start optimizing for them. Because what you're measuring is what you're believing and what you're communicating. So the focus needs to move from individuals to the team as a whole. And also sometimes this means that someone will have to stop doing whatever they're doing, jump in and help someone else. Even though this won't make their individual's metric shine, it will help the team's metric shine. So try to encourage this specific behavior. That's the first thing. From then on, my best advice is to start analyzing where the problems come from. Why do people behave like this? Is it that they are highly specialized and they're not able to take on the work of others? Or is it that they don't feel confident enough, like they've built bands between each other and they feel like it's not their job, or they don't have they shouldn't jump into anyone else's territory? Or is it that they don't really have the authority and they're used to waiting for feedback, directions, and approvals to get there? Or is it that the things are not clear overall and no one actually understands what needs to happen? This is the first step. And always when I talk about Kanban and I talk about the implementation, how to get started with Kanban, often some advice say start with implementing WIP limits. My advice is never start implementing WIP limits, because if you are managing a team like this, having a WIP limits in place will make things way worse. In order to understand where the problems come from and what's the most important thing that you need to focus on first, what you can do is adopt a very simple policy. So you have your Kanban board. What the policy state is, the next time when someone is ready with what they're doing, instead of pulling more work from the backlog, go through the board from right to left. Just go through everything from right to left. Look into items that are aging in the process. Look into items that are blocked or waiting for a feedback or for approval, or look into items that are assigned to someone who is not available or on a vacation. Look into everything that staying and waiting in the process and see whether you can do something about it. And if you can, just go for it and do something about it. You are only allowed to start new work if there is literally nothing that you can do. And as you start implementing this approach and move the focus of the people from starting new work to finishing old work, you are essentially achieving the outcomes of implementing WIP limits. You move that focus. You focus the entire team to delivering results. And if they cannot deliver results, if that doesn't help and you observe over and over again there are problems, you start typing down all of the problems that pop up, and then you start working upon their resolutions first. So let's say that indeed there are people who don't understand each other's work. Try to pair them together so they can actually observe what others do and they can feel more and more comfortable to understand the concepts. If they work on different projects, the pairing approach will also help because they will exchange knowledge, they will collaborate better. You're improving indeed the collaboration within the team. If it turns out that there are no clear definition of done, definition of ready, acceptance criteria, probably you need to spend some more time on the upstream where you actually define the work itself. If it turns out that there are blockers and you're constantly waiting for someone else's feedback, you can actually escalate the issue and start expressing how that problem is affecting your performance. So very simple. Instead of once you do whatever you're doing, instead of starting new work, go through the board, right to left, see whether you can do something about it. If you can't, let's talk about why you can't, and let's see what to do about this. I hope this answers your question.
That was quite thorough, Sonia. So I think hopefully it answers Sonia's question. We'll find out here in a second. But you know, it's something that I've experienced as well. I've worked with security teams that all handled their own work individually on an individual basis. There was never a case of having a collective group effort in managing the work, kind of like what we're talking about here, sharing some of that awareness and pairing up with the work. They were effectively their own silos, a team of like, I think it was 5 or 8 people. And they just never been socialized differently. They never had the opportunity to think differently, to say, wait, we can pair up on work and learn from each other. So that if one of us goes out on vacation, we can cover the other person, that kind of thing. And something that happened as a result was simply just looking at the data behind this. So saying, here's our workflow. We have different types of work we're supporting. We're individuals supporting only a particular type of work, but let's look at the workflow and see where we can improve as a team overall, even though we're kind of modularly focused in our own areas. And that kind of helped people to recognize maybe where they could collaboratively solve problems together and improve the outcome for everyone involved. So that kind of created a little bit of a mini team effect, which kind of broke down some of those silos. But you know, something else worth mentioning too that you probably have felt before, for this lady who asked this question, was for me, it took a little while to get that conversation going where the silos felt comfortable enough to trust what's there. Because you talked about high trust and trusting people a lot. This was in a government agency, so the trust was about as low as you can get it, basically. So this was, you know, it took about, 6 months to really build up the confidence to say, let's do something about this now. But it can happen.
Yeah, you're making such a great point. So first, when you talk about data, no one can argue with numbers. No one can argue with numbers. Having the data in place and bringing that transparency and that visibility is invaluable. It makes the conversation so much easier because no one can argue with that evidence. If you observe that having people individually handle their own things, and you observe that this is what is causing the most of the delay of the workflow, and if you see that, let's say you can reduce your delivery times 4 or 5 times just by figuring out a way to help the team move around the workflow and help each other, that's totally worth it to give it a try and to actually dig into this direction. And you're absolutely right. It takes time. It's not something that is going to happen overnight, but it's certainly worth it. So yes, I absolutely agree 100%.
Awesome. Awesome. And there are two more questions here. I'm going to take on this other one that just popped in because we were talking about this a little bit. And this person said, I tried this approach, and the response I got from the team is they don't want another person to mess up a code, and they have so much time writing. So they don't feel comfortable with others coming in to work on their code. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So to give you an idea of an example of this is I've had elite programmers I've worked with before, and they're like, we don't want someone who's a junior programmer or even worse, a tester coming in and working with our code. So I think that's a tough one to answer. That's a challenging trust scenario, I believe, when you have a coder who says, well, this is my code, don't mess up what we've got. This is a slight tangent from the Kanban space, but if that happens, I believe if they find that there's truly, this is almost like a hypothesis from the coder saying, oh, this is going to cause problems. So I'd love to hear first what your thoughts are, Sonia, on this. Like, what happens here? How do we handle that kind of problem?
So when I hear someone think like, I don't want anyone else to mess with my work because I've spent so much time working on it, the underlying problem is the fear of these people to lose their impact. These people feel like they are someone who is writing amazing source code, who is doing great job, who is one and only that can do this. And if someone else's actually jumps in and proves that they can do the same thing, they're losing their identity. There is an identity problem here. So when I work with teams that have these issues, my first thing is to look into what are the labels of everyone. Do you have like a clear separation between senior developers, junior developers, and all of that stuff? And try to minimize that implication that these people are really the only people who can actually handle a certain problem or a certain scenario. Like, the way to go here is to really start working on helping these team members understand that they will be valuable, they still will be valuable, even if someone else does what they can do. Because every single person, they're unique on their own. In our team, we have high performers, we have low performers, we have so many types of people, and that's perfectly fine. This is awesome because every single one of them has something special that makes them an invaluable member of the Nave team. So people should not be afraid that they will lose their identity, and you have to make sure that you communicate this loud and clear. I think this is the first step, and this is going to help a lot in shifting that mindset and that perspective.
Interesting. Thanks, Sonia. That's a good answer. Also, coming from a technical background, I'd also challenge the programmer. Is your environment not robust enough to handle a few screw-ups like maybe you've made before? So I would kind of challenge them to say, look, if you're worried about this person breaking something, you probably broke something too. So let's see if the system and the environment's resilient enough to handle someone learning. Right? I mean, I feel like if you're writing a good environment, it can handle goofballs getting into it and then still do well. At least that's where I've worked before, and I've been the goofball, so I know how that goes. So let's see. There was one other one here, a couple other good questions that we can go through. There was one other question up here. It's a simple one, but it's really important, I think. The aging chart that you showed us earlier, is that something that can be utilized against Jira? Is that an option to bring that into Jira and say, can we see this information from there?
Oh, please go to getnave.com. So Nave is a Jira plugin. What you can do with Nave is you just connect it to your Jira, and then you can actually analyze your boards. At the moment that you create a dashboard with Nave and connect it to a board in Jira, it will generate the aging chart for you and a ton of other charts that will help you manage your work effectively. So it takes a couple of minutes to make the connection, and the setup is really like when you create your dashboard, move your statuses to doing done and push the update dashboard button. That's it. It literally takes a couple of minutes. There is a 14-day free trial. There is no need for credit cards or anything. Go and check this out and see your own data. And if you have any questions or anything different pops up, like if there is a scenario that you'd like to implement and you don't know how, or something doesn't make sense, or you need any help, we have a Slack community where you can jump in and talk directly to me, to the team, and to plenty of other Nave customers, agile coaches, managers, small business owners. There are plenty of nice conversations, so I would love to welcome each and every one of you there.
Awesome, thank you. One other question is probably an easy answer, yes, I believe, but does this work with Azure DevOps as well?
Yes, so Nave integrates with multiple systems. It works with Jira, Azure DevOps, Trello, Asana. We also have a version where you can actually upload your data in a CSV format or a JSON format. We have an API to automate the process. That's quite suitable first, either if we don't provide integration with your tool, or if you maintain strict security policies and you really want to anonymize your data. So that's always an option. Yes, it also works with Azure DevOps.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so here's the final question. It's a bit of a brain one for sure, because it definitely has to do with lead time. And so here's the question that came from the audience here. If we know our overall lead time, but have no distinction between the types of work, so we don't know if this is work A or work B, like, for example, a bug fix or a feature, for example, what should be the best first step for forecasting?
Manage the age of your work. Go take the aging chart, look into this every single day, and make sure that you handle any item that's aging in the workflow. Regardless of what's the type of the work, and you have your overall lead time, your overall lead time is a guideline. It's going to build the health zones and the percentiles for you. It will tell you if that specific item is taking longer, if it's going to the red zone, it's taking way longer than 95% of everything else that you have delivered. So manage the age of the work. This is the most important thing, because by managing the age of the work, first, you help the team collaborate more effectively, because the entire focus is really on the problems of the workflow. And second, you improve your overall delivery time, because when the focus is on the age of the work and the team is doing everything on their power to keep it consistent and stable, then you improve your overall performance. And one more time, the accuracy of your forecasts strongly depends on the predictability and the stability of your workflow. As long as you have the practices in place, as long as you have the principles and the systems in place, then you're good to go. It doesn't matter how much data you have collected. It doesn't matter what's the nature, the size, or anything else related to the work itself. It doesn't matter how many people work on your team. What matters is, do you have the management practices in place that will help you optimize your workflow for predictability? That's it.
Great, great. So in some ways, you're kind of working in the direction to greater predictability, greater stability, greater understanding of what that lead time really means. So at first, you might be kind of just having some lead time data to work with, but over time,